Oh, great. So welcome, everyone. It's great that you could join us today. This is Teresa Jacks. Today, the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers is pleased to host a Funders Briefing webinar featuring Linda Zippo, Executive Director of the Center for Nonprofits. And since 2012, in partnership with the Center, the Council has been providing these Funder Briefing webinars to inform you about the issues and trends that are impacting the nonprofit sector. I hope these have been valuable to you. They've been very valuable to me at the Council. I hope it also helps you to, as you continue working with your grantees in the various partnerships that you're engaged in. So most of you, many of you, know Linda, and her bio was included in the registration page, so I'm not going to go through her bio. I hope you had a chance to read it. Linda, I want to say thank you very much for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to learn from you during these webinars, and with that, let's get started.
Thank you, Teresa, and good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here, and I always enjoy the opportunity to present these webinars for the Council, and the Council has been a wonderful partner to the Center for Nonprofits, and things are getting bigger and better every year, so couldn't be happier to be able to do this. I am Linda Zippo, and I'm with the Center for Nonprofits. This slide was me a couple of weeks ago when we were going to have our webinar, but we got a little bit snowed out, so hopefully you are still sitting here keeping warm with your warm beverage and ready to engage in a great conversation about the trends and issues that are affecting the nonprofit community and the philanthropic community. Center for Nonprofits, for those of you who are not familiar with us, we are New Jersey's statewide association for the charitable community. We have been around for 32 plus years, and we exist to strengthen the nonprofit community in order to improve the quality of life for the people of our state. We pursue our programming through a variety of very broad lenses. They include advocacy and public education, capacity building, and a variety of member services and nonprofit sector research and public education. There's much more information about us on our website, and you can always feel free to get in touch with me, and I'd be happy to share more. So what are we going to talk about today? We're going to spend a little bit of time with an overview of the nonprofit community. Sometimes it's good to have a refresher about just how broad and how deep this community is. We'll talk a little bit about some of the policy trends taking place and the new developments on the national scene. We will spend a little bit of time on government nonprofit contracting, and that's because there are some very exciting developments, but they also have significant implications for private philanthropy as well as the nonprofit community as a whole. And then we'll spend a little bit of time looking ahead at some of the emerging issues and trends and what kinds of initiatives are in the pipeline, both to the Center for Nonprofits and the things that we've had the pleasure of working on with the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers. As Teresa said, please feel free to either use the chat window or unmute your line when you're ready to ask a question. I was told that it was a little bit hard to hear me, so I'm trying again, and hopefully this is a little bit better. Someone can give me a high sign if I need to speak up a little bit more. So let's get started. Nonprofit community in New Jersey is very, very broad. A lot of policymakers in particular and folks in the private community don't necessarily know just how broad the nonprofit sector is. This includes the grant-making community. There are 30,000 501c3 organizations in New Jersey, employing 314,000 people. It's almost 10% of the private sector workforce and more than many major industries. The nonprofit community spends some $37 billion every year and marshals the talents and energies of about 1.5 million volunteers. The reason we like to bring this up is because not only it's information that some people don't know, but it helps drive home the importance of the economic value of the nonprofit community, that we are important not just from a social and a quality of life perspective, but we are part of the economic engine that makes the state run. Despite some retooling and some market corrections, sector is still at a net increase. Even after IRS auto revocation, this is still a very fast-growing sector, and numerically speaking, the numbers of organizations have increased dramatically over the last 10 and 20 years. With this growth, though, comes a fair amount of scrutiny from a variety of quarters. It comes from the government community, from media, from the public, and from the funding and donor and philanthropic communities. It doesn't have to be a bad thing, but nonprofits are very much under the microscope, and this can focus on a lot of different lenses. Compensation levels has been a big, big target. The administrative and expense ratios, meaning how much of an organization's expenses are devoted to admin or fundraising as opposed to program. The Council has been very vocal about the problems with using or relying too heavily on that ratio, as has we, but and more of that will come later in our presentation. Nonprofits are certainly being challenged more to show the impact of the work, to be more accountable and transparent in what they're doing. And in terms of, this will come up a little bit later when we talk about property taxes, but there is an impression out there in some policymaking circles that nonprofits may not all be paying their fair share, and that's a phrase that's coming up increasingly and disturbingly in some of the policy discussions. So we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Again, no big secret here. Demand for the services that nonprofits provide has been growing dramatically. This has been happening nationally, and it has been happening in New Jersey. The statistics here are from the Center for Nonprofits 2014 annual survey and the Nonprofit Finance Fund's national survey from 2013. But the trend is still the same. You're talking about, in New Jersey, about 80% of organizations responding to our survey saying demand is going up, and it's still going to go up. And I took a sneak peek at our 2015 data, and that really hasn't changed. And that's one of the biggest challenges that nonprofits are facing and that philanthropy faces when you're talking about how we can collectively improve outcomes in communities, improve the public good. In the Nonprofit Finance Fund survey a year ago, half of their respondents said they couldn't meet the increased demand. Obviously, the implications for that are pretty enormous. Compounding the difficulty is what my colleague Tim Delaney from the National Council of Nonprofits calls a stealth shift. It's the gradual transfer of the burden of delivering services and programs from government to nonprofits. It takes the form of budget cuts. It takes the form of unfunded mandates. It takes the form of efforts to curtail tax privileges or exemptions that nonprofits enjoy, and there are quite a few challenges to the whole system of contracting between government and nonprofits, and we will get into that in a little bit as well. Some additional challenges and trends that we are seeing in the nonprofit community. The cost of doing business. You hear a lot about that in the for-profit community, but regulations, procedures, requirements for, it could be filing, it could be reporting, and again, not all of these necessarily have to be bad, but there is a cost associated with compliance, and when those kinds of activities are not funded, it makes it difficult for nonprofits to do their work and fulfill their mission. Again, you'll see a lot of this being tied to revenue and revenue scarcity and on all sorts of levels. Nonprofits are being looked at increasingly as a potential source of revenue, which means that tax privileges and tax exemptions are being challenged increasingly. And there are also more in the way of threats to nonprofit autonomy. There's in some schools of thought, there is a feeling that if a nonprofit receives funds from the government, somehow it's an extension of government and should be subject to either the same kinds of requirements or essentially be a government subsidiary. And that is a little bit disturbing to us, and we are watching that very carefully. Nonprofit resource squeezes. I mean, this is really what we're talking about. Government is, the revenue shortages are pretty acute at government in all levels. It's particularly acute at the local level. So what we're seeing not only in New Jersey, but certainly across the country, are a variety of challenges to nonprofit property tax exemptions. They have been either explicit in the way of court cases and or statutory challenges. The state of Pennsylvania, as we speak, is exploring a constitutional amendment to change how they approach their property tax exemption for charitable communities. There are two court cases in New Jersey in particular that are making their way through the process that we're watching very carefully. One involves Princeton University. The second involves Morristown Medical Center. Now, certainly the environment that universities and hospitals operate in is very different from the rest of the nonprofit community, but the way these cases could play out could have significant ramifications for the nonprofit community as a whole. Property tax challenges take the form of claims that if a nonprofit is charging fees, it's therefore inherently not charitable, or if it's claimed to have a profit motive, then it's not being operated in a charitable manner. The property tax framework in New Jersey is rather convoluted, so it's ripe for lots and lots of different challenges. And these are not the only two challenges that have happened, but these are very, very current and pressing. So we are watching those very, very carefully for when some decisions are handed down. Beyond the property tax resource squeeze, we've talked a little bit about challenges to contracting structure, and when it costs so much to provide the services under contracts, or you have to go through so many administrative hoops that it makes it challenging. And the other area that we'll talk about a little bit is charitable giving incentives and the deductibility of gifts to charity, which has a revenue component for the government, but it's obviously a very important incentive for charities. So some specific policies, what's going on that we are seeing? First, some federal things. What are we looking at? What are our friends at the National Council of Nonprofits and other national advocates looking at? Big question, of course, with the new Congress is, are we going to have gridlock or cooperation between Congress and the White House? It's been a difficult last several years. It's hard to know whether Congress and the White House will find ways to collaborate and cooperate and get things done. And obviously that has significant implications for the work that we are all trying to do out in communities. Just a few examples. That, as you may recall, the federal fiscal year, which runs from October through September, the budget for fiscal year 2015 was enacted in December 2014. It was like 3 months late. The budget of the IRS was cut dramatically. The IRS, as you know, administers and enforces many of the tax laws that nonprofits and grant makers and philanthropies have to comply with. Although there was the fallout from the scandals surrounding the review of 501c4 applications, and so the IRS budget was cut some $300 million in response to that. So that affects how the IRS can administer the programs that nonprofits have to comply with, how the IRS can enforce the laws and weed out bad apples and whatnot. Other things to watch, of course, are how various programs that are important to nonprofits are funded in the budget, and it's always a question as to what will and won't happen with the Affordable Care Act. In the new Congress, these are just some of the things that might come up in debates around tax reform. They may come up, they may not. It may be bundled into other legislation, or nothing may come of it. Certainly, there have been calls to limit or cap the deductibility of charitable contributions. It's in the President's budget again to make a maximum deductibility of from 35% to 28%. That has not been adopted in previous years, but it's back in again. Other aspects of deductibility, annual giving limits. There have been some calls for a donation deadline instead of December 31st, making it April 15th to allow donors a little bit of extra time to give some gifts before tax filing. The estate tax is always something that's being debated as to the limits, the exemptions, and again, that's an area of contention. As government is looking to find new ways to raise revenue, look for the unrelated business income tax rules to be looked at. Similarly, donor-advised funds, which have grown dramatically in recent years, there are some calls to institute a payout requirement for donor-advised funds, which currently don't have them. And foundation excise tax reform, we'll get to that in just a moment as part of a recent development. This is and if you blinked, you missed it kind of thing. And again, this is because Congress couldn't reach agreement on some of these solutions until it was very, very late in the process. A number of key charitable giving incentives expired at the beginning of January, and I'm dialing the clock back 12 months. So January 2014, there were a series of tax incentives that expired, and there was a lot of advocacy on the part of national players and many folks at the state and local level, including us, to try to restore those during the year and make them retroactive to January 1st, which ultimately happened, but it didn't happen until December 19th. So what this meant was there was a retroactive restoration of key giving incentives, including the IRA rollover, inventory, food donation inventories, and land conservation donations. And this is important because if you don't have the incentive in place until December 19th, you have 11 days to take advantage of this. And this happens year after year after year. These incentives expire. They are not renewed until late in the year, although last year was pretty extreme. And then they expire again and they have to be renewed. So as of January 1st, 2015, these incentives expired again. However, the House of Representatives has taken up another bill to restore and make permanent 3 key giving incentives, the same ones that were restored last year: the IRA charitable rollover, donations of food inventories, and land conservation easements. The bill number is H.R. 644. It's called the America Gives More Act. It's the same title as one that was in play last year. And the House of Representatives is going to vote on this Thursday, February 12th. So if you're on the Center for Nonprofits email list, you may have gotten an email alert about this morning, because we are working to mobilize support for this. The other provision of this bill that would interest the folks on this call is that there would be a simplification of the foundation excise tax as part of this bill. It was not part of the 12-day restoration that was passed last year, but it's back in this year. So certainly if you're interested in being involved in this before the vote on Thursday, talk to Teresa at the council, or you can email or call me, and I'd be happy to provide more information. But this is something that for us is a very important issue, and it would be nice to make this permanent, because charities need the certainty and they need the relief that these incentives would provide. A couple of other things on the federal level. This isn't current right now, but it's something that we watch very carefully. You heard me mention briefly when I was talking about the IRS budget having been cut, it was a fallout from the excess scrutiny of 501c4 applications. These are the social welfare organizations. They are also, that's also the designation that some of the political organizations can use. The IRS attempted, in the wake of the Citizens United ruling, to try to regulate the activity of some of the 501c4 organizations. The problem was they took such a broad brush to these regulations that a lot of the activities of nonpartisan 501c3s would also have been caught up in it. Things like nonpartisan voter registration, nonpartisan get-out-the-vote kinds of activities. So they were overly broad, and there was a huge hue and cry, and many, many thousands of responses, many in opposition. So the IRS has pulled back on this, and right now we don't know when and if they're going to rewrite these rules. They say they're in the pipeline, but at this point it's unlikely that it will happen in time for the 2016 elections. But I bring it up now because it is something that in a broader sense, we always have to be mindful of, both for the on the federal level and on the state level. Policies that are sometimes enacted with different targets in mind are so broad that they can have an unintentional chilling effect on the work that charities do and the ability of charities to have a meaningful voice in public policy. And that's something that we need to be concerned about, because the viewpoints and the perspectives and the stakeholders that many charities and philanthropy represents are not often represented or well represented in policymaking halls. And we think there needs to be more of that. So that's a reason why we watch it very carefully. One other development, I wanted to get your feedback about this as well. You may have heard about this from the council or elsewhere, but this is also related to some of the flack that the IRS has taken with respect to the delays in processing applications, not only for 501c4s but also for 501c3s. The IRS, in an effort to fix their backlog and process some of these applications sooner, came up with a streamlined Form 1023. They call it a Form 1023-EZ. They unveiled the final version in July. And it's available for smaller organizations, and it provides for, it's supposed to be a shorter form and enable organizations to apply for and get their tax exemption faster. We, along with many others, expressed some concern about this, because instead of a comprehensive form that gets reviewed by an IRS agent, essentially what you have is a 3-page checklist. There's a worksheet, and there are all sorts of certifications that an organization has to submit. But our concern is that organizations don't necessarily know what they. It's just too easy for well-meaning organizations to get in trouble, and for entities that may not be so well-meaning to slip through the cracks. One of the things that I wanted to check in with, I've heard from some colleagues in some other states that funders have been pushing back, that some funders are not entertaining applications from organizations that have received their tax exemption by using the Form 1023-EZ. And as long as you are all on the phone, I wanted to check in with you and see if this is something that you are experiencing. And feel free to unmute and let me know yay or nay, or if you've heard this from your colleagues elsewhere as well.
And Linda, as we're waiting for folks to unmute, how would a funder know if an organization received exempt status by using the Form 1023-EZ?
Well, I know in some other states funders have simply been asking. They've been asking what has how the organization has gotten there, or they'll ask for the form that was submitted in the first place. Sometimes if you know that a group has just gotten its tax exemption, that could be another indicator. I don't know off the top of my head if the form, if the actual determination letter is different, but that is something that I can check.
But we could assume that if an organization received their exempt status after July 2014, they may have used the Form 1023-EZ.
They may have, that's correct. It doesn't necessarily follow that they absolutely did, and one of the things that we have been doing is trying to educate organizations that just because this form exists doesn't mean that you have to or should necessarily use it. Sometimes there's some comfort to be had in having an IRS agent review your documents in greater detail. And that's something that we want to make sure that organizations are aware of, that there are some drawbacks to using this form. It's not necessarily better just to have it done more quickly and to save a couple of $100, which is really what you're talking about. I think, not hearing any responses, I think I'll move on. And again, if you have questions about anything that I'm going through here, please type in, because we want this to be a conversation and want this to reflect what you are experiencing, and hopefully if something is not resonating or if you have more questions, you will let me know.
And just for the group to know, sometimes it takes a beep when you hit *7 for it to take hold. So continue to ask your question.
Okay, so moving on, government contracting reform. It sounds pretty deadly, but it's really important, and I will explain why. this is not a new issue. You've heard the council talk about it. You've heard the Center for Nonprofits devote a lot of resources and time and communications to it as well. And there's a reason for it. There are a substantial amount of organizations contract with the government, and government relies on nonprofits to provide a wide array of critical programs and services. And the contracting system, it's pretty well documented that at this point that the contracting system is broken. This is a national problem. It is not unique to New Jersey, and it takes many, many different forms. It takes the form of contracts that don't cover the cost of providing services. When the application and the reporting requirements are so time-consuming and needlessly complicated that they're sapping resources, scarce resources, from organizations, clearly that's a problematic development. Another common problem is changes to the terms in the middle of the contract and late payments. Illinois was particularly bad, but they're not unique in terms of being owed, and this is an average across the country, $200,000 on average being owed by state governments. And late payments, obviously, when you think about the cash flow implications, having to somehow find the money to fill those gaps, it's pretty significant. Here in New Jersey, this information comes from surveys done nationally by the Urban Institute. We were worst in the country in terms of the percentage of organizations saying that the contracts didn't cover the cost of services. Let me repeat that. We were number one, and number one is not a good thing, in terms of contracts that don't cover the cost of services, according to the responses to this survey. We were number 5 in terms of the complexity and time-consuming nature of the application process. We were number 9 in terms of late payments, and we were number 12 in terms of problems with complex and time-consuming reporting requirements. This is not a good thing, and the implications are pretty significant. We did our own rapid response survey here in New Jersey to find out, this was done in 2014, to find out in the past year had things gotten any better. And unfortunately, you can see the numbers here, and they are pretty serious. You have single digits in terms of responses. Respondents have said that things were getting better, and half or more in many cases for these very big problems that said these problems were getting worse. And why do we care? Why should a private funder care? Why should a nonprofit that doesn't get government money care? It goes back to what we talked about before. Demand for services continues to go up. The ability of nonprofits to meet community needs is being compromised because the funding is not keeping pace. The gap between the amount of the contract and the cost is not closing, and government budgets are still very, very strapped, so the prospects of government funding going up in many circles are pretty remote. All you have to do is look at the amount of dollars that we've got in play here, and you'll get a sense of how significant this can be. This is a national statistic. Nationally, according to the Urban Institute, over $1.5 trillion in total revenues for charities across the board nationally. Over 70% came from program revenue, including government contracts. Now, universities and hospitals are in here, so that will skew the data, but we're talking about a significant amount of money. When you bring this down to New Jersey, and we will in a moment, we're talking about $40 billion in total revenues, but 77% in program revenues, including government contracts. Any way you slice it, the money is significant. And when the gaps exist, nonprofits are going to you, private funders. Some of them will have to cut programs and staff. They will try to, that there are pressures, and we've heard this from grant makers, and tell me if this resonates, that there's pressure on grant makers to keep these government-funded organizations whole, which means there's less philanthropic dollars available for other causes. And government themselves is looking to philanthropy to fill the gaps. Charity can take care of it. private foundations can take care of it. We hear these things on a disturbingly regular basis. And we've also heard from you very vocally that private philanthropy can't possibly fill these gaps. It's an unfair and unreasonable expectation. So what do we do about it? Well, the good news is there was a very, very big win that was finalized in December of last year, and this was the uniform guidance issued by the U.S. Office of Management and Budget. This is huge because, among many other things, it is many, many pages long, it applies to federal grants and contracts and state and local pass-throughs, meaning any state or local contracts or grants that use federal funds. It, for the first time, requires that these contracts reimburse nonprofits for a reasonable amount of indirect costs. This is the first time that the government has acknowledged explicitly that nonprofits have, and they are valid, that they have indirect costs, that they are an important and essential part of doing business. It also does a variety of other things in terms of shoring up transparency. It also allows for more administrative expenses to be counted as direct costs and not indirect. And it raises the audit threshold, which means for single audit, which is a very complex audit that has to be done with some federal contracts, this minimum threshold for the single audit is raised now from $500,000 to $750,000. So not everybody will have to have a single audit, and that will save time and money and administrative expenses. Again, it's big. It's very, very big, but it's big in more ways than one. It's complicated. It takes time to roll out. The final guidance, the rules were several years in the making, and the final guidance was announced on December 26, 2014. So now we're at the stage where this is being rolled out in the states. We want to make sure that state and local governments actually implement these guidelines in the way they are intended. We also want to make sure that nonprofits understand that these guidelines exist and how they can exercise their rights, how they can negotiate an indirect cost rate, how can they take advantage of these new and favorable procedures. And we also hope, and this is something the Center will be working on along with publicizing and training around the existing uniform guidance, we hope that we can encourage state and local governments that use funds that are not federal in origin to do the same thing, model good behavior. And our colleagues in Illinois were actually successful in getting legislation passed that does just that. So we're looking at some similar kinds of things here. Beyond the OMB guidance, there's so much else that can be fixed in terms of contracting. We have reports that the Center for Nonprofits has issued along with our partner advocates. The National Council of Nonprofits has a wealth of information about this for trends across the country. If you'd like to find out more, I encourage you to do so. You can find some of this on our website, so please take a look. It is complicated, but the potential is enormous. Again, we're talking about ways to improve efficiencies. If you can't find extra money in terms of grant and contract appropriations, then there are ways to improve efficiencies on the expense side if you can streamline some of these procedures that make no sense at all. That's going to continue to be a priority for us moving ahead.
So, Linda, before we move on, can I ask, how can grant makers help their grantees learn about the changes that have just come about? Because I suspect that a lot of nonprofits in New Jersey don't know about it.
Yeah, there are a lot of things that can be done, and communication is absolutely key. If there's an opportunity to share the information that has been coming down the pike, we certainly are passing this along to everybody in our communications network. We'd be happy to do presentations if that would be helpful. We are going to be putting together trainings about this, and if you're not on our email list, we can put you on, or the council can share this information and spread the word about this. There are great websites from the National Council of Nonprofits. They are just a font of knowledge on this stuff. They've been leading the charge nationally. But that's suggestion number one, make sure that your grantees know that this exists. Another important thing that grant makers can do when you're having conversations with your colleagues in government, talk about this stuff. I mean, the other challenge here is a lot of the government folks that have to implement this don't necessarily understand it either. They're not necessarily aware of what it really means. So the capacity building and the training and the information sharing is not just on the nonprofit side. So there are a lot of resources out there, but this is still unfolding in a very big way. So encouraging organizations, first of all, again, making them aware that this is actually occurring and helping to connect them with some of the resources that exist, whether it's the Center for Nonprofits, the National Council of Nonprofits, or many, many others that are involved in this issue. That would be a tremendous thing to be able to do.
Great. Thank you.
Okay, so what else are we seeing? What else is going on? The issue around government contracts and the uniform guidance is one facet of a broader trend that we think is very, very encouraging. And the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers has been taking a leadership role on this, and we have been privileged to partner with the Council on a series of activities. But all of this is part of a broader trend and a very encouraging wave of recognition that nonprofits need to have enough resources to be able to do the work. And doing the work entails things like infrastructure, technology, admin. Nonprofits have to raise funds, and that costs money. All of these things, that it's not just about the program. And that's really, really huge. I mean, I've been in this field for longer than I will say, but let's put it this way, over 20 years. And this trend is really, really encouraging to me because the conversation is getting changed, and people, funders and nonprofits and donors are starting to change the kinds of questions that they ask. You may recall that the Council endorsed a statement about ending the overhead myth. This is a national initiative. The idea that the ratios of admin costs to fundraising costs to program expenses is the best indicator of a charity. Well, we all know that it's not. So some of the initiatives that are kind of chipping away at this overhead myth and the idea of just using these ratios to measure a charity's worth, some of them include Doing Good Better, which is a very, very encouraging, it's an informal, at this point, working group comprised of representatives from the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers, board and membership, and the Center for Nonprofits board and membership. And we are talking together about how the conversation can be changed, how we can look at and encourage others to generate more in the way of resources funding the real costs of doing the work, providing the resources to that nonprofits need to do the work. Our colleagues in Illinois, the Donor Forum, have had a campaign in place for a couple of years now, and it's not just an education campaign. It's dialogue, it's advocacy, it's public policy, and others. But their campaign is called Real Talk About Real Costs, so that's really what we're talking about, that nonprofits cannot continue to be starved of the resources to do their work because that does not make for a very effective organization. The National Council of Nonprofits, as part of its work rolling out the OMB guidance, but it extends beyond it, has a campaign that it's calling Own Your Own Costs. This means on the nonprofit side, being able to budget effectively, understand actually how much it costs to run your programs. It's easy and sometimes tempting to skimp on some of these broader line items, and we can't afford to keep doing that. So those are just a few, and of course this billboard had, the organization is called the Charity Defense Council. It's founded by Dan Pallotta, who's been a very staunch advocate in this area, and this kind of sums it up. Don't ask a charity if it has low overhead, ask if it has big impact. And this is all about changing the conversation and asking the right questions, because at the end of the day, what we all want to do is see real results and improve lives out there in our communities and across the state and beyond.
And I want to share with the group that a number of, the council is part of the forum, a larger group of regional association groups throughout the nation. And a number of our members, of our colleagues, are collaborating with their nonprofit associations, their state nonprofit associations, on this kind of work, just as we are collaborating with the center, with Linda, to push this message out.
And it is exciting, but I should say that the work that the council has been doing on this was singled out for recognition when the National Council of Nonprofits was talking about this at one of your recent national meetings. So it is being noticed, and in some ways, there's a lot of great work being done across the country, but in some ways we are the envy of other states and being admired for, and the council, again, is to be congratulated for the work that it's doing. Some other things that are going on here in New Jersey. And this all has to do with a broader priority of improving understanding about nonprofits. It's one of the center's core programmatic areas, and we do this through a number of different ways. Our Issues and Trends survey, we do this every year, and this helps us track what's going on economically, how nonprofits are addressing the issues that are confronting them, whether things are looking up, whether there's what is troubling them, what are the exciting opportunities on the horizon, and our 2015 survey is coming down the pike very soon, so stay tuned for that. If you haven't been to our website, and if you were to go, you would see a very short motion graphic, just as a reminder of the countless ways that nonprofits make lives better on a daily basis. It's a public education piece designed to help people who don't necessarily think about themselves as being involved with nonprofits or benefiting from nonprofits, just how pervasive the function and role and importance of nonprofits is. Center for Nonprofits was proud to partner with the Council of New Jersey Grantmakers this past fall on a briefing to staffers of the Office of Legislative Services to give them an overview of the nonprofit and philanthropic communities and help to dispel some of the myths that might fuel policymaking and encourage them to look at both of our organizations as a resource. And this was a tremendous success. So successful that we are going to be doing part 2 in October of this year, and Bill Engel will be one of our presenters, so we're looking forward to that. Some other things that are coming down the pike. We've talked about improving understanding about nonprofits. Center for Nonprofits works with the Red Tape Review Commission, which is chaired by the Lieutenant Governor. This was a commission established right when the governor took office. Its original focus was on helping to ease regulatory burdens for for-profit businesses. We and our partners went to the commission and said, excuse us, nonprofits employ 10% of the workforce. We're part of the economic engine, and we hope that you will include nonprofits as part of your work and part of your focus. And in fact, they have, and we've been making steady progress in terms of some regulatory and procedural advances. So that's going to continue. And of course, we're always looking to shore up ties with legislators and regulators. That's just the core part of our public policy function. A couple of new initiatives that we wanted to be sure that you were aware of, and some of your colleagues are already involved with. Center for Nonprofits has convened a small working group of legal experts in the state, including your own Bill Engel, to look at 2 very specific initiatives, 2 specific public policies that are overdue for reform. One is the framework involving raffles and games of chance. This does not sound like the greatest thing since sliced bread, and I know that you're not going to go running to look at raffle laws, but this framework hasn't been updated in a meaningful way largely since 1954, and we are looking at ways to changed the framework to allow nonprofits to use more of their raffle proceeds to fund their general operations. Again, we're talking about the overarching, again, we're talking about a framework of resource scarcity. So anything we can do to improve the climate, to allow nonprofits to get the resources that they need to do their work is something that's of great import to us. So we are making some good progress on that. Stay tuned for more information about the raffle laws and games of chance. And the second component that this legal group is working on is a long overdue modernization of the New Jersey Nonprofit Corporation Act, which was signed into law in 1984, and again, in most meaningful ways has not been updated since. There are basic things, including e-governance, the ability to use technology to govern responsibly, and a whole slew of other provisions that this group is looking at very, very carefully with an eye toward not revamping and starting from scratch, but really improving what we have. And it's a really exciting development, and again, this is one of these, stay tuned, but we are looking very deliberately at the Act with an eye toward reforming that, making a framework that will benefit everyone. On a longer-term basis, of course, right now the state's revenue outlook does not really permit this, but we are still one of the minority of states that does not have any form of state-level tax incentive for charitable giving. And it is something that we are acutely aware of and would like to change at some point in the future. Right now, again, our state budget does not permit any examination of this in a meaningful way. It just doesn't have the legs. But it is something other states do enjoy it, and in fact, when they some other states tried to curtail their state-level giving incentives as a revenue saver, they had to turn around and restore them because the impact was that devastating on charities. So there is some momentum elsewhere and good documentation about how important this can be. So we will definitely be looking at that as well.
And that's something that the Council's Leadership and Policy Committee has talked about here and there over the years, and I do think we actually have a couple of members that are very interested in that when the opportunity is right to help encourage some type of charitable giving incentive in our state.
Great. I've talked a lot about some of the broader issues that we're looking at, and one of the things I wanted to be sure was to make sure that you had the opportunity to weigh in. These are some of the things that we're watching, but if you see the bottom of this, there are a series of question marks, and that's where we want you to weigh in. What are we missing? What are you concerned about that we might not be either looking at or that you'd like to flag for our attention, or that you're talking about in your own meetings and with your own grantees?
And remember, press *7 to unmute and give it a minute.
I will move on, but I don't want to squelch the discussion.
I think someone might have unmuted.
Oh, did we? Okay. Someone want to weigh in?
Okay.
All right, I'll move on and we can keep going. And again, one of the things that we try to keep tabs on is what are nonprofits doing in response to all the trends that they're experiencing. And these are not necessarily surprising. Nonprofits are always looking for new revenue sources. They're adjusting their programs. There's more collaboration going on than ever, and some of this is on the informal end. But there's also more discussion and more actual execution of mergers or formalized kinds of collaboration agreements. So this is just some of the spectrum that we're seeing, and presumably this will be continuing. The issues that we've asked organizations about, we always ask them, what are the top 5 issues facing your organization? What are the top 5 issues facing the nonprofit community. And the themes are pretty consistent. We're talking about financial uncertainty. Organizations want to be more visible. They want branding help. They want stronger boards. The need for a stronger board comes up in the top of every survey that we do. And then staffing, and this all goes back to infrastructure. It goes back to supporting the cost of doing the work. So there are really some common themes here. And the same very analogous kinds of themes come out in terms of what the viability of the nonprofit sector might be in the future. Now, of course, these are 2014 figures. 2015 is being tabulated as we speak. So we will be unveiling 2015 at the end of February or early March. I can tell you I've started to take a look at the data, and there's some cause for some optimism in some circles, but the challenges of rising demand are continuing to be very acute, and we'll be sharing more information about it when we've got it available. Other implications for the funding community. This is stuff that we've been talking about, and I know that you've been talking about in your circles at the council. Infrastructure, making sure that full funding for full costs, real talk about real costs, whatever lens you put on it, we're talking about making sure that the resources exist to do the work. The need to strengthen boards, that's a big thing. And it doesn't mean that nonprofit boards are weak, because nonprofits have great boards, but a lot of them are looking for either additional board members or just strengthening the operations that they've got. Evaluation, being able to demonstrate the impact of what's being done. If we're trying to change the conversation away from the administrative expense ratios, we better be able to make a good case that what we are doing is really making a difference in the community. So how can we do that, and how can we make that, provide those methodologies in ways that are not, that are actually workable? And again, what are we missing here? What are you seeing? How are you working with your grantees to address these kinds of issues?
Linda?
Yes.
It's Bill Engel.
Hi.
Two things that sort of go with all of these would be, number one, the education of boards and staff in terms of what's possible and what's not, which includes focusing on where you get the money, so that people don't always remember that most of the money comes from individuals, and they've got to develop a deeper individual base. And then along with that is learning how to do proper research of the funders, like the foundations or corporations that are out there, so that they don't waste their time chasing leads that really don't have any prospect of success versus trying to develop the relationships that do.
Great. Thank you. And it's always so tempting, because you see the amount of dollars that each, funders or grant makers are attempting to go after, because the amount that they give is different. You've got one grant from one foundation versus many smaller gifts from individual donors, so you can understand the temptation, but your point is absolutely spot on. It's easy to forget how important individual donors are, and how important it is to be able to cultivate them. And as you said, make sure that that you're approaching funders where a fit might actually be possible.
It's basically an allocation of resources of the organization, both the staff and the board.
Absolutely.
Yeah. This is Anne Marie, and in support of what Bill said, what I'm finding with a lot of my nonprofits is that as they're cutting back services, one thing they've cut back is their development officer, and now they're relying on either the executive director or other staff, or hiring part-time people. And one thing I find myself talking to executive directors about is how to go about hiring a good part-time person and, working with them in an effective manner for the organization. It's a challenge, I think, right now for a lot of organizations.
Yeah, I can certainly understand that. Organizations have, as you said, had to cut back in some very painful ways, and the other reality is that this field there is a lot of turnover. So you've got new people coming in all the time, and they require training and supervision as with anything. So I think that's really important. And in fact, if you have tips or something that you would like to share out and more broadly in the community, we would be happy to do that, whether it's under your auspices or if you'd just rather pass them along. We would love to do that.
Okay.
Other ideas before we start to wrap up?
Linda, another thing I often hear grant makers and our members talking about is developing their relationships with their grantees. But, often there's, whether we say it or not, there's a little bit of a dynamic between a power dynamic with grant makers and grantees. So how can grant makers help their grantees feel comfortable working in partnership with them? What kinds of things can they say and talk about?
I think from where I sit, the beauty is a lot of the people on this call already do this. They engage in regular conversations, regular communications. I think a little bit of reassurance is also helpful. I often talk about the freedom to fail, and I don't necessarily mean in the most extreme, but not everything is always going to go the way everybody intends. So the freedom to be able to talk frankly about what's working, what isn't, what might be possible to be tweaked along the way, how can things be improved, or what might need to happen. That ability to have an honest dialogue without necessarily feeling like your future funding is at stake, and understanding that sometimes it might be, but many times you're talking about adjusting along the margins or really refining things. And if an organization can be encouraged to say that, or even, we all know we're still coming out of an economy that has been absolutely devastating, and many organizations did not get through it unscathed. And to be able to have some of those conversations about what's being done, share suggestions, I think that's really, really important, because the temptation is always there to want to put on your best possible face, which makes sense in some contexts, but you want to have that honest conversation because it benefits everybody.
Great, thank you.
Just by way of an overarching framework for how the center is approaching its work, we did recently conduct a comprehensive strategic planning process, and many of you on the call actually participated in that, so we appreciate the feedback that you provided us. And it's helped us to refine our priorities and direction going forward. So in terms of approaching our work, we're talking about being a champion and protecting the nonprofit community, because nonprofits are so indispensable to the landscape in New Jersey. We're talking about advancing in knowledge and promoting best practices, and convening and fostering connections. We do this through our annual conference, but we'll be doing more in the way of issue forums and briefings and opportunities for those kinds of communications and forging of connections and networking and partnerships. So in an overall sense, what you can look at from the center moving forward will fit within those broad priorities. And it has been and continues to be our distinct pleasure and honor to work with the council, because we are in this together, and this partnership has been, I think, very, very beneficial not only to our two organizations, but more importantly to the broader stakeholder community that we all serve. Don't know if there's time for any more questions or not, but I'm certainly welcome any more that you have to offer or suggestions. If you're not connected with the center on social media, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, and we're on LinkedIn. And sometimes you can get the most breaking news on some of those channels. You can also sign up for our email list. We never share our emails with third parties. So if you get spam, it's not because of us. So encourage you to do that as well. And please stay in touch. We went over a lot of information in this hour, and there's certainly much, much more to come, but would love to keep the conversation going. So I would like to thank the Council and all of you for the opportunity to share this information with you today. And please do keep in touch, and I look forward to continuing to work with you in the months ahead.
And Linda, this is Anne Maria. I just want to thank you for this extraordinary presentation. It's invaluable to our work, and that you do it for us every year, and that it's fresh and new every year is just amazing. Thank you, thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure to do this, and I'm glad to hear that you are finding it valuable. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne Marie. I was going to do a closing, but I think you did a great one. I want to thank all of the council members for joining us. I encourage you to email us at the council, or Linda, which you can see her email on your screen, to stay up to date about these and other issues impacting New Jersey's nonprofit sector and your grantees. So we'll talk more soon, and thank you, everyone.
Thank you.